I'm sure that some of us Spyro enthusiasts have watched a video or two of the original game and thought, hang on, that looks a bit different to what I remember. And you were probably right. That is, if you were watching gameplay that came from a different region. While it's not uncommon for games to have regional changes, and that some differences in Spyro 1 are rather well known, I've decided to show all the differences between the NTSC and PAL versions of Spyro the Dragon for the PS1 that I could find. I'm not going to be talking about the Japanese version of the game because it's so radically different that it'd probably be worth dedicating a separate video to.
Oh, thank you very much!
This video will mostly be looking at specifically the in-game differences between the American and European versions of the game, but first I'll briefly mention the designs of the covers, discs and manuals. Each Black Label and Greatest Hits or Platinum copy have changes to their front and back covers, as well as their discs, and manuals too. I was unable to compare the manuals for the Black Labels, but based on how the manuals for the Greatest Hit and Platinum versions aren't the same, it can be assumed that this also applies to the originals too. Now for the in-game changes. Starting with a minor change, all the opening screens and credits have their companies match their regions respectively. The next is in the title screen, where oddly the music starts sooner in the NTSC version. The NTSC version says press start, while the PAL version says start game. Also, to cater to multiple countries in Europe, that version has language options while the American release doesn't. One more change is that the camera is slightly further away, so that more can be seen. This is the most obvious instance, but it may occur in other parts of the game too. The next few differences are mostly universal throughout the game. The load times when travelling between worlds is slightly faster in the NTSC version, but for other levels it's about the same. Although the text stays a little longer in the PAL version. When entering a level, the text and chest size is slightly bigger in the American version, as well as it including an ellipses. This applies to both normal levels and bosses. However, when leaving a level, the ellipses is present on both versions. When pausing the game, the text box is a bit wider in the PAL version, and the text is a bit smaller. This is probably to compensate for the additional languages having varying text lengths for each option. Spyro's charge speed appears to be a bit faster in the PAL version of the game. This can be seen when chasing Nasty Nork, with how easily Spyro catches up to him, whereas in the NTSC version it takes him a bit longer. This can also be seen in Wizard Peak as Spyro is able to reach the first blue wizard and take him out, but only in the European version. A similar thing happens in the flight stages, although this time it's the trains and boats that move at different speeds, with them both moving slightly slower in the European version. I might be wrong, but this doesn't seem to apply to the planes. Now let's talk about the extra hidden music tracks in the game. The game contains some additional music tracks that can play randomly in levels after staying there for a while. There are about 10 tracks, 2 are original and the rest are remixes. The NTSC version has 4 remixes and only 1 of the original tracks. whereas the PAL version contains all of them. Not only that, but in the PAL version the bonus track that appears in both is uncompressed unlike its NTSC counterpart. This is more speculation based on online discussions and YouTube comments, but it seems that this track is more likely to appear in the Peacekeeper's home in the NTSC version, whereas, at least from my experience, it is just as likely to appear in almost any other level. When freeing a dragon, the dragon's name is much larger in text size in the American version compared to the European version. It also appears that the dragons disappear slightly faster in the American version too. A few dragons were altered in design for the PAL release. This was mostly to fix errors in the NTSC release. Cyrus and Altair were recoloured in the PAL versions, most likely so they didn't look the same as Cosmo and Boldar respectively. Oddly though, Jarvis and Hectus were both recoloured in the same way, so they still look like each other in the PAL release. Cletus, though, originally freed in the Beastmakers, is released the second time in Twilight Harbour, but in the American version Cletus has a radically different design in his reappearance. His colour scheme is paler, and his head shape is different. His head frills are much taller too. This is because in the prototype from the 18th of July, Cletus was originally named Silvus, and he had this appearance. And finally Magnus, originally released in Peacekeepers, has differently textured horns when appearing again in Nock Nexus in the NTSC version. This next change appears in a few levels. Some enemies have changes to their design, but all in the same way. They all have a red tip to the sharp ends of their weapons, so to say. The small Norks in Dark Hollow have red tips to their swords in the NTSC version, but this is absent in the PAL version. The same happens in Town Square with the bull's horns. Interestingly though, in both versions, the Banana Boys and Long Arms in the Beastmaker's world only have red tips when seen from further away distances. However, this doesn't apply to the Metal Banana Boys in Metalhead. This is because originally all these enemies had red tips, but the detail was removed. It can be assumed that they were not totally removed for the further away models and textures mistakenly. This difference though returns once more in the Dreamweaver's world, with the Cupid's arrows tips. In Stone Hill, the return home portal has been moved slightly closer to Astor's platform. This means that only in the PAL version can Spyro go all the way around the back of the portal. Also in Stone Hill, Spyro will bump away from the shepherds when charging into them. This applies in both versions. However, in the NTSC version, Spyro can charge straight through the shepherds in Toasty. Speaking of Toasty, it appears that the shepherds fly further back when attacked in the PAL version. I'm not sure if this applies to other enemies as well. In Clifftown, the Egg Thief will stall when approached from the right in the PAL version, making him much easier to catch. When leaving Clifftown, depending on the version played, Spyro exit from different sides of the portal. In Ice Cavern, the last big armoured Nork will need to be pushed twice in the NTSC version to be knocked off, but only once in the PAL version. This might be another example of enemy knockback as seen with the shepherds in Toasty. In the Magic Crafter's home, the wall that extends outwards by the Green Druid moves faster in the NTSC version. I didn't test this for other scenery manipulated by the Druids, so it may apply elsewhere. In High Caves, the music for the stage depends on the version. The NTSC version has a remix of the Treetops theme, similar to the hidden remix tracks, whereas the PAL version has an original track, which was most likely intended to be the actual track for the level. In Terrace Village, the music is slightly louder in the PAL version. I tried to keep the recording audio levels about the same by matching the music in the Beastmaker's home and then comparing the Terrace Village volume. As can be seen, the music in the PAL version is indeed slightly louder. Also, while testing this, I noticed that the chicken at the beginning of the level faces different directions depending on the version. In Metalhead there are 2 red gems and a green gem in the chest towards the end of the level. The placement of these gems depends on the version. In the PAL version they are next to the rest of the gems on the outer ledge in the room. The reason for this change is unknown, but it is thought that it could be because the ledge can be difficult to reach due to its height matching the ledge Spyro has to jump from. This is a strange one. In the Dreamweaver's home, the enemy inside the castle before the Haunted Towers portal can be hit with a cannon through the wall in the PAL version. I couldn't seem to get this to work in the NTSC version, as the cannon would not lock on like it does in the PAL version, so for now I'm calling it a difference. Some pools of water in Spyro 1 are designed to instantly kill Spyro, usually because they are so far below any other platforms that there's no chance of survival once fallen in. However, there is a tiny pool in Metalhead that also has this effect, despite being easy to get out of. Even with full health, the player's controls are locked and Spyro will die. This also occurs in Dark Passage, at least for the European version. Anyone playing the North American version will be pleasantly surprised to find out that Spyro can walk on this pool of water without any penalty and jump back out if need be. Twilight Harbour has the U added in the spelling of harbour for the European version to match the UK English spelling of the word. Finally, in the credits, the Sony studio for the respective regions is listed. And there we have all the differences between the NTSC and PAL versions of Spyro 1. None of the changes have any real significant effect on gameplay, but they do offer some mostly cosmetic or superficial features that may make you decide which version is better.